My guest this week is Jim Gavin. Jim is the creator of Lodge 49 on AMC and the author of Middlemen, which was published by Simon & Schuster. His fiction has appeared in The New Yorker, The Paris Review, Zoetrope, and Esquire. He is also the founder of Tiger Van Books, an independent press. While a student at La Jolla Marymount University, he was a DJ at KXLU 88.9 FM, and past careers include gas station manager, sports writer, toilet salesman, production assistant at Jeopardy, and he currently lives in Culver City. And it is my great pleasure to welcome to Revolutions Per Movie, Jim Gavin. Hi, Jim.
Hello, sir. Thank you for having me.
I am so glad to have you on this because Lodge 49 ended up being one of my favorite things that I've ever got to devour in my lifetime. It came out of nowhere for me. I didn't at the time. I just kind of stumbled upon it. And in the Pacific Northwest, we do have a lot of lodges, and me and my brothers had a lot of history with just kind of like going to like regional wrestling shows there, or garage bands playing in one. And I worked in a Masonic temple when a media arts center took over part of the floors, and there were like secret doors, and you go into rooms that had like really creepy paintings on it. Since the show is about trying to keep this lodge alive, why did you decide to take on this world?
I had personally like kind of a glancing experience, mostly through the Elks. I grew up in Southern California, in Long Beach, in Orange County, in the city of Orange, and Long Beach has at one point had the largest kind of like Elks Lodge in the country, and also two of the largest Masonic temples in the country, and huge membership after World War II. And that, of course, has just dwindled, and I've always, when I drive by one, I kind of slow down, and they're always just have a bit this air of dusty old, both dereliction and mystery to me. They're kind of a relic of a kind of another era, and part of doing the show was answering the question like who's in there, what's going on in there, and that's just matched with like kind of a long-term interest in kind of goofy Western esoterica and everything. And so we got to kind of play around with all that. Essentially, though, I think it did answer. I wrote this. I was thinking about today. I wrote the pilot in February of 2014, so it's almost been 2 years. And I kind of did it to do it, and this was kind of in the wake of kind of the long tail of the crash, 2008, and I was very much at loose ends, and a house had been foreclosed on, and all these things, and I just felt the lodge itself was some answer. Writing about it was answering something inside me, which is kind of like a real sense of disconnection. And I felt like I needed guidance at some point. And so I kind of invented a mentor, essentially. And the image that kind of stuck with me throughout was a young man knocking on the door of one of these places that, we've been talking about, and an older man answering it. And I've always kind of written about mentor relationships in some way, and this was kind of like the largest expression of that. And so all those things kind of went into to writing about it. But yeah, I mean, the role these lodges have played in kind of America and as a part of Americana is so fascinating and fun.
I know what you totally mean about some places. You're like, what's going on in there? It's been around forever. The lights are on. I never see anyone inside or outside. Never see anyone leave. And sometimes it was like that with when you were younger, like certain rock clubs, that you were too young to go into. There would be this mystery of like, what does it look like in there? Is it filled with people? Is it derelicts? I remember being really like scared to like enter clubs when I was younger, and just being like, they're just going to tear my head off and drink my blood because it's a punk rock club. And, you go in and like, no one's there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It had such a lovely tone to it. And I just thought the use of music in it was so unusual and beautiful. And sometimes it would be like a 4-minute broadcast song would play.
Yeah.
Did you write the series with that in mind?
Well, once it was going, yes, and I really felt I'm a music geek. I was like a college radio DJ and all that,
Uh-huh.
and there was a specific sound that I wanted, and some of my favorite bands like the Lilies, Broadcast, kind of this kind of delicious, sun drenched psychedelia, felt right for the show.
Yeah.
So I wrote in a lot of specific songs. They don't always, but that doesn't mean it's going to work. Like sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. I brought in an old friend to be our music supervisor, a guy named Tom Patterson, who is a music journalist and just like one of these, archivist guys who just understands the whole vernacular of cosmic music, etc. And so he would be digging up crazy obscure tracks. I think at one point he hired a private detective to get to like find a relative so he could clear a song from some 7-inch he found at a charity shop in Plymouth, England. Like it's all that
Amazing.
stuff. So super music nerdy stuff. Another key was a band called the Sound Carriers, who from Nottingham, England, and they almost became the house band for Lodge 49. Towards especially when we were shooting in Atlanta, I was listening to them a lot, and we ended up using a lot of their tracks, and they kind of became in some ways the heartbeat of the show. And then we got to do cool stuff. The second season, Kurt Heasley, the Lilies, he did a song just for us, which was like just like a dream come true. I mean, so like, yeah, music was absolutely key to the show and the feeling of it. And I think we used a broad range of music, but I think tonally there is kind of a shape to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it helped with the mystery of it and also kind of the kindness of the show,
Mhm.
which I really appreciated. I felt like I had a big heart and I wanted to hang
Yeah.
out with these people. It was like,
Yeah.
I was like, I want to know Blaze. I want to know Dud. Like I want to walk down these halls. I want to have a beer with these people.
I know. I know. God, I miss them as characters. I miss the actors who played them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I will say this, the, I, as being one of the luckier humans on earth, like, it's all in your head and then you are actually making it. And we had this genius production designer, Mike Shaw, who he designed the lodge. And like
Right.
the first time I walked in the tavern, like I almost fainted. Like I was like, here it is. This is like the dream. It's actually, and any chance I got when we were shooting, I would just go and sit in there. And yeah, and so I think people who find the show, there aren't many of them, but when they do, I think it does. They do feel that, and that was something
Yeah.
we consciously strove for. And when we wrote it, it was kind of, you know, we're kind of still in the era of kind of like, all these kind of like more this different type of male protagonist was like kind of at the forefront of like,
Yes.
and this was just a different type of dude to hang out with, and they're
Yeah.
kind of more my people, honestly. It's not probably our people. And
Oh, totally. I think anyone listening to this podcast has either seen it or would easily fall in love with it. I highly recommend it. And if I still had the video store, I'd be pushing it so hard on people when it came out as a box set. I'd just be like,
yeah,
stop what you're getting, put this in the pile, let's go.
listen, man, I think physical media is coming back, so
Yeah,
let's
exactly.
fingers crossed. Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting. The film you picked, Don't Break Down, a film about Jawbreaker from 2017, is so
Yeah.
musically and stylistically different than the music in
Yeah.
Lodge 49. And out of all the music documentaries you could pick, I was really interested in this one because for me, I just thought, oh, he's going to pick some like obscure British psych thing or maybe
Yeah.
a thing about the monks documentary from the 60s. And, here you have this SoCal, New York, you know, pop punk band. So, what was your start with Jawbreaker?
Yeah, and I'll try not to make this a complete exercise in nostalgia for me and
Too
my,
late.
but
Too late, my
I'm
friend.
yeah, for me that they were kind of this bridge and this mystery to me, and I was in high school in the early 90s, and all I cared about was basketball. When my basketball career was flaming out, I was finding other things, and I was meeting new friends, and I was just a kind of dirtbag working at a gas station. And I kind of I something was happening in my head, is like, I it was essentially like punk. I liked the sound of punk, whatever that meant. And there were like kind of these, something like tracks on Check Your Head, or I
Right.
hear a Descendants song or something, and I was kind of like chasing some kind of sound. I had friends who had been with Green, like listening to Green Day pretty early on and everything. There's just one band I kept hearing about called Jawbreaker, and like the kind of guys I knew would talk about it with this kind of weird, eerie reverence. And in the documentary, there's a music writer named Jessica Hopper, who talks about the moment she first heard 24-hour revenge therapy. And it was eerily similar to my experience, where it was like a Saturday. I was out playing ball with friends at a park, and then one of them was like, "Oh my!" I think he said, like, "My brother has the new Jawbreaker," and I went with them. And I remember sitting in his den. I remember the afternoon, Saturday light, and you hear the opening of Boat Dreams on a Hill, and like that was it. Like that really just like I became kind of obsessed with them. I had a friend uh, make me a tape, that thing friends used to do. I'm still friends with this person because he spent 2 hours putting together this cassette for me. So I was a big Jawbreaker fan and just loved them. And I will say I was listening to them without knowing a thing about them. Like I was kind of obsessed with their lyrics. I sensed they were from the Bay Area. They kind of were just kind of they and then as I was getting kind of more into music and I went to Loyola Marymount, was a DJ at KXLU, and I kind of understanding these scenes and all these things, and like these guys just seem to like be outside of all this. And um yeah, so I was just like a huge Jawbreaker fan. The first time I went to San Francisco was in like 96 or 97. I remember like coming over the hill, I think the 280, and I was listening to 24-hour revenge therapy, and I was just like,
Yes.
like, oh, and so I was just like a huge Jawbreaker nerd. And it was a similar thing when I met someone else who like got them and liked them. It was like really like kind of an intense bond. They kind of lived in that era for me. And then as the documentary gets into, like, Jawbreaker are associated with essentially one thing. They're the band that sold out, and it killed them. And I remember all those friends from high school who were the big like Jawbreaker heads. They wrote them off. They were like, "Fuck you, you sold out." And it's so insane for us to like imagine that mentality, but it was very real. And this is like kind of mid '90s. I think Jawbreaker broke up. Here's the thing: I never saw them, and I have this memory of my freshman year at LMU. Some friends were going to see them, and I had to finish some paper, and they went to go see them at Jabberjaw in LA, and I went to go write a paper. Like, what was I thinking?
That's a tiny place too. Jabberjaw was like
Yeah,
150 people coffee
yeah. I mean, it
house.
was like kind of our hangout, and that was one of my great regrets. It was like I chose to go finish a paper than go see their last
Right.
show at Jabberjaw. But um, so they were kind of finishing as I was kind of getting into like what was like the mid '90s indie music scene, and my sense was that Jawbreaker was kind of sniffed at by kind of the cooler indie kids. And
Yeah.
the Pacific Northwest had a huge oversized kind of like influence on the scene in LA. Is like that's kind of where it really was, like, bands like Unwound and all the Kill Rock Star bands. And that's where kind of like that was the cool stuff. And Jawbreaker was kind of this like almost fuddy duddy, like, what were they? Were they even punk? They sold out, like, who gives a crap? So I've been listening to them for years, but I didn't know about this documentary till last year, and I watched it, and it kind of it was such a picture of a time. And
Totally.
but they kind of center it on this band that, like, they committed heresy against the underground.
It's a weird time to catch them too.
Yeah,
And they're such strange individuals
yeah,
in terms of how comfortable they are within their legacy.
Yeah.
It was made by the people who made the Minutemen documentary,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I loved so much
Yeah.
as well. And I thought it was kind of cool that they picked another band that people are very passionate about.
Yeah.
I feel like the people who love Jawbreaker have, that's like a pinpoint of focus,
Yeah.
like, and love. It's like really strong.
Yeah.
There was so much going on, and when they were doing their stuff, I was doing my stuff,
Yeah.
and so it was like, oh, there's just so much to pay attention to. And for some reason, the bands that were part of that Gilman Street
Yeah.
thing, like I remember we opened up for um, Green Day in Portland. No one there. They sat in the van, didn't come in at all until they played, didn't talk to anyone. And we're just like, who are these moody, like, they're big babies,
Yeah.
like, boo hoo. And again, like you said, it was a time of kind of snobbery still,
Yeah.
and, quick judgments on music. And you had different lanes you stayed in, and you're like, no, I'm a touch and go person.
Right.
I would never listen to, so that's the uncool label, but then you miss out on all this incredible stuff
Yeah.
that's happening. And I think youth was a big part of that, in terms of just like missing out on things, being a little too late. Like you said, being in the right place at the right time and just hearing something while the sun's at a certain, angle shining on you. Like all those things influenced you being able to discover and live in a band's legacy.
Yeah, what the documentary, which is really good, and is a picture of, it's three guys. It's, Blake, Adam, Chris, and they're all so different. Blake is, kind of has an aloof quality, has a like, and the artist in him is kind of seems at the forefront. Chris Barmeister is kind of like a very socially awkward, savant who just couldn't, was kind of in the shadow of Blake. And then you have the drummer, is just, I think, as good a drummer as anyone on earth, Adam Faffler, who's like the most normal dude one can imagine. And but when I was like really into them and obsessed with them, I didn't know anything about who they actually were as people. And one thing the documentary just clarified for me was like, Jawbreaker they weren't from a place, they weren't from a scene, and they weren't from a label. They were kind of just this weird, they kind of started in New York, then we're in LA. I think people associate them with the Bay Area, but that was later on that they kind of got ensconced in that scene. But they really formed their own weird little world. And it was a world that when you look at the footage of them and the bands in that era, like, no style at all. I mean, no style, no guile. And it was just kind of hilarious.
3 average Joes.
Yeah.
And they're still average Joes. That's what I kind of loved about it. Like they start kind of at the end in the documentary, like, them meeting together for the first time, in over a decade, and in this recording studio to play mixes, and they're already kind of awkward because they haven't seen each other in a long time, but they seem like the same people. You know what I mean? The dynamics of Blake and Adam are stronger because they've just known each other longer, and Chris is kind of apologizing for past behaviors, and it's like they've got a lot to deal with. And then it's like, oh, now we're going to go back and tell this story. The filmmakers obviously were fishing for some connection, like throughout the movie, sprinkled through. They're like, why don't you play a song, Blake? He's like, no, I don't want to. I want to ruin the magic.
Right.
I don't want to show how this is made. It's just like, why, it's like a rainbow. Why would you take it apart? And it's kind of awesome. I like they keep trying and trying. And I thought you get a sense of how strong-willed these 3 individuals were.
Yeah.
And I think at a time when you put a band together in the late 80s, the dream is limited, and you just are doing it because you love it, and then things happen around you during that era. And it seemed like a band like Jawbreaker was a perfect example of things happening around them that I don't think they ever expected.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They didn't seem like when I say they had no guile, there was no. I think when you look at like 88, 89, is kind of like this nowheresville in the music scene. It's kind of after and before. It's kind of,
Yes.
there's like the punk is kind of fizzled, and then it's right before everything that takes off in the 90s. And that's where Jawbreaker actually found themselves. And so they're like the band, in my mind, they're like the band from nowhere. Like, and all what binds them and what binds their fans is just the records. Like, the sound of Blake's voice and his kind of turn of phrase and his kind of, I think for me, like, I think in a special, there's a certain type of male that, you know, he gave permission to, like, to guys to actually listen to love songs and like and be romantic and care and kind of like, in a way that felt, at least for me as like a 19-year-old, felt very palpable and real. And like, I think, the yeah, so I think they just kind of created their own world. I was trying to think of like weird, examples and stuff, and like, the Pixies are a weird band, like, but they seem to kind of almost, sprout from Zeus's head, just fully grown, and like, um,
Yes.
uh, one band that I thought it was in a sense like was like Love, this band that like, wasn't part of the
Interesting.
scene, but like was its own weird universe that just kind of like burned itself out too soon. And like,
Yeah.
Jawbreaker kind of is on that continuum, I think. And the one thing I will say is that like a lot of those, like a lot of the on my radio show, whether it's 2 a.m. to 6, like I would get requests for Jawbreaker all the time, and there's people working weird jobs, and um, a lot of the other bands that I would play that I liked at the time, like kind of the mid '90s, kind of like more hardcore, whatever. Like I don't listen to those bands very much anymore, but like
Right.
Jawbreaker has a timeless quality to it that I think they've earned it. And I think, Blake's kind of just, uh his that kind of romantic, whatever mantle he kind of brought to the fore, it has you I probably got tired of it at a certain point in my life, maybe my late 20s, early, but it's back. I'm like, I love it. Like
Yeah.
if I'm on the freeway, I'm listening, I'm blasting Accident Prone, and it's just the best. So
I didn't know that Adam, the drummer in the band's sister, was Canberra from the voluptuous horror of Karen Black. Like this totally wild,
yeah,
dark, transgressive performance art rock thing.
yeah,
And to just see her in it early on, and she says something really amazing. She says that very few bands make you want to dance and cry at the same time.
yeah,
And from talking to people, and in this film, you see it. It feels like that is a perfect description of their music.
yeah. So yeah, no, they wear their heart on a sleeve in a way that I think I know the indie world, like some a band like Pavement, who's one of my favorites, and also I wouldn't describe them as fashion plates. They're kind of dudes in t-shirts and shorts, and um, they, they're kind of, in my sense, like there's an intellectual quality to Steve. I mean, like, and just it's a different thing, and it has its own kind of
Yeah.
like power. Um, and there's an irony there, to it. There's not a lot of irony in Jawbreaker. It is really straightforward in a way that in other bands would, I think, get tiresome. I think, Tony Wilson, uh, of 24 Hour of, Granada TV and all that. He said something like, "All the great bands are ironic. They're all basically comedians, essentially, taking on the
Okay.
form." I wouldn't say that about Jawbreaker, but I would say that, they do something else that has managed, I think, to last through time. Um, and a weird thing, like with Pavement, like I think the irony has become sincere in a way. It only, you
Right.
know,
That's right.
feels the more you go back.
When you listen to it now, is it the lyrics that lead it for you for Jawbreaker? Is that the most important part? Is it the music, or is it just sandwiched together? Because some things, like some bands, I fell in love with the lyricism of something first before I could understand the music.
Yeah.
What is it like for you when you listen to Jawbreaker?
I think when I was younger, it was the lyrics. Like I would kind of like really kind of puzzle them out, and or just they would go through my head. I mean, I love the sound, but I think now, like it is the wash of sound and those, like, like when you hear that opening, the drums at the start of 24 Hour Revenge, there, like it just like flips a switch in your brain. And I think they're, yeah, in that way, I guess it is sandwiched together, but like they were a wonderful meeting of like form and function as far as like what they could generate out of a three piece.
Right.
Blake's voice it's a good example of a unique voice being more powerful than like a pure voice, right? And like um,
Yes.
that kind of rasp, and I think the feeling I had, even though they were kind of weird and mysterious to me when I was younger, the documentary confirms this, is like they were one of us. Like they felt like actually normal people in a sense, and the lyrics and the kind of feelings that Blake sings about are that comes from a real place. And yeah, and I do appreciate that.
Do you like all the records all the way through in terms of a discography?
I do, and I'm also someone who was just like in the documentary. There's a few people who are like dismissive of "Dear You."
Oh man, they're so hard. Like someone's like says, what is it? Jawbreaker. They're at that point. They're like Jawbreaker is like Walmart.
Right,
They're just
exactly.
like flat out, just like they're garbage.
Yeah,
And you listen to it, and you're like, sounds pretty tame, in
yeah,
terms of production. It's like double track vocals,
yeah.
a little. You can tell it's a little more polished,
Hmm.
but you put it up against stuff at the time, and it's kind of like it's still pretty rough around the edges.
Yeah, they and I was someone who didn't really pay much attention to that record. I kind of went. I was like, I don't like everyone else. I was like in the early aughts. I was like, oh wait, this record's freaking great. It has, I think, two or three of their best songs ever. And and I think,
Yeah.
but I was, yeah, I heard 24 Revenge, but I actually got a Unfun was the one that I actually like listened to the most, maybe, which is like
Right.
their least. It was like they were really young when they made it, and but yeah, I associate that record with like the freeway and driving and just always being on, especially in Southern California.
So if you didn't see them live, were you going out? You were a DJ. Did you go to a lot of shows back then?
Well, we were able to get into a lot of shows free, which was great. So in LA, that meant Jabberjaw was like the hub, like, and so I saw tons of shows there during that era. And um it was that this was like the kind of this is what I mean, like the kind of whatever world Jawbreaker came out of was kind of fit, and it was what seemed the center of the universe for in my world at that point were like bands like the Makeup or Juna 44, or like some of the like it all seemed to be from these other places. There are bands like Los Cincos and Further here in LA that would play there a lot. Who else? Blonde Redhead, bands like that. So it was more, we were at LA station, but we were like really like weirdly kind of obsessed with other scenes and almost kind of unappreciative at the time at how good a scene was actually happening right in front of us, because
Okay.
Jabberjaw was such a destination for that world. Yeah, so I think I went through this period where you play a lot of like hardcore stuff, and then you fall in love and get a girlfriend and you start like you know listening to a little quieter stuff. And I kind of made the move towards more like, by the end of my DJ career, I was playing more like Lilies and Olivia Tremor Control and those type of bands. That's kind of what's
Sure.
carried me through.
It's so funny to hear you talk about. I mean, it's just like a year goes by, and then all of a sudden, it's like, yeah, Olivia Trimmer controls around. It's like
Yeah,
things were moving
yeah,
so fast in terms of like just like this is gone now.
yeah,
Nothing sounds like this anymore. Now it's this
yeah,
is kind of taking my head space. It was just kind of incredible. And in this film, you see that Jawbreakers, the audience kind of created their mythology
yeah.
for them in a way, and their importance and what they meant. All ages, don't sell out, you're political, this and that. And they're, I kind of felt bad for them in a way. It felt like they really got pigeonholed
Yeah,
in terms of like, no, you have to just stay like this one thing forever.
yeah,
Don't change, don't grow up.
yeah,
it was really wild. Where, all the other things going around it were growing up and changing and fluctuating and
Yeah.
experimenting. So I find it wild that the scene that was so heartfelt and, just DIY could not wrap their head around success or change.
Yeah.
And they were basically banned from playing the Gilman.
Yeah. No, it's such a funny, with the revolution eats its children, is that, like I think because there's something particular about Blake and the way he kind of communicated, and you're so right. That's a great way to put it. Like the mythology came from the fans, and the ownership that, like, these songs are just for me,
Yes.
and this guy gets me in particular. And it was a very real, palpable thing. And, in the documentary, there's video of, like, Blake saying, like, you can, we'll always stay on an indie or whatever. And, like, we're not interested, then they go on a tour with Nirvana, and, like, the Backlash starts. That's one of the funniest things in the documentary. It's this panning shot of, like, the huge tour buses for, like, Nirvana, Mudhoney, and then it gets to Jawbreaker's tiny van that is too small for the loading dock.
And it's so funny to look back because, again, Nirvana were a band that no one expected to get as big as they did. Yeah. And then people projected onto that. And it's so funny how selling out was such a big deal.
Yeah.
That doesn't really exist anymore. But I remember we were on Sub Pop and we were being offered things, and we were like, we can't do that. Our fan base will never forgive us. We'll be toast.
Yeah.
And nowadays people would be like, hey, I heard your song in that Toyota commercial. Congratulations. That's great. But back then you wouldn't even sniff something like that. But Nirvana, wow, who were, disruptive in their own way and kind of accidentally fell up. It's so funny that people were just like, no, sellouts, like they had planned it.
Yeah.
Like Nirvana did not plan that success. We were all shocked because they were just a local band from the Northwest.
Yeah.
You're like, not them, really? Nirvana? And then you're like, yeah, they are good.
Yeah.
But just so funny that, like, they went on tour with Nirvana. I'm done with this band. Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah, it's weird. It's almost like, when we look back at, like, some obscure theological debate from, like, the 13th century that, like, caused turmoil and people were getting, burned for heresy. It's like, what were they thinking? That's so, like, that's what this feels like now, looking back just, like, 20, 30 years. And if for whatever reason, Jawbreaker is the one band that really, really paid the price for it. Like, they died for our sins. And
it's so tragic. The story they tell of them playing at the Roxy and people buying tickets to go see them at the Roxy just so they could turn their back on the band while they played live was, like, so disgusting to me. I was like, just imagine you're Jawbreaker and then you're just like, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Like, you bought tickets to make a total statement against how we've just let you down.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. No, there's that scene where, they decide to sign, and after the fact, they're interviewing Adam Faffler, and he's just sitting at his kitchen table. He just kind of, like, looks, like, he's like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, we changed our minds. It happens. I don't know. It's such, like, a human, like, what would you do if someone, and that they had to struggle with that, or that you had to struggle with that, it just seems wild to me now. And I don't know.
Well, they were also not getting along at this point.
Yeah.
They were kind of like, they were a band that really fought a lot in the van, fought a lot in the studio, which is not unusual, especially being that young. And Adam and Blake, it was like their first band together.
Yeah.
They were, like, attached at the hip.
Yeah.
And that obviously has dynamics as well. And Chris never being able to, like, crack the two of them.
Yeah.
Like, always being, like, a little different personality wise. And I love it. He's like, they're into that SST shit. And I thought I didn't like that at all. So funny. Again, just
Yeah.
such a youth thing to be like, I don't like what you listen to in the van. Like, it drives me crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. They like just again going back to like the total lack of style. Like Adam and Blake, they would look the same if they were in a rock club or at a Dodger Stadium or drinking
Totally.
beers in a fraternity backyard. Where Chris, like, he looked like this guy is a punk and like he's like
Yes.
um and they so that stuff is like fascinating. And I think a lot of those interviews happened around 2008 or something like that. The documentary came out in 2017, so there's a gap between all that. And you know they ended they're playing again. They have, I think they've reconciled. They're playing, and they're playing the big
Yeah.
and I actually finally got to see them. I saw them at the Palladium about 5 or 6 years ago, and I was singing along. Like, it is. I'm happy for them. One just really dumb, silly anecdote. One of the funniest things I've ever seen at a show. So Blake went on and did Jets to Brazil. That I think had some success, and it was like all in the
Yes.
aftermath of Jawbreaker. And I remember that their first record was like I was living in Berkeley at the time, and like you would walk by cafes and it was on everywhere. Like everyone like was listening to it, and uh, they played the Troubadour, and I went with this group of high school guys who got me into Jawbreaker years before. We were all out of college and like, okay, here we go. We're all forgiven. Let's go see Blake and just Brazil. And we get there. It's a big, excited crowd. Blake comes out, and the whole place just went silent. Like it was like kind of a god walked out because he hadn't nothing had it was all in the aftermath of the everything. And he goes up. It's dead quiet, and this guy Danny I was with, just total smart, says very loudly, just in the driest way, like, "Hey, is that the guy from Jawbreaker?" And like, and Blake heard it and kind of just like you could just feel him kind of wince on the inside. I think he heard it.
Yes.
That's how I remember it. But it was just a very dry line that I've always appreciated. But anyway, so I think
I love it. And I love that, you could hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
Everyone's just like, oh my God, there, that's Blake. Just, oh, here he comes. And then just your friend just poking the air with it. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's kind of, I think it's a really interesting documentary, especially as someone who didn't listen to them. It's fun. They talk to Steve Albini. Has a great section where he's like, we're talking about Jawbreaker, not Jawbox, right? Okay, Jawbreaker. He's like, I think we used this. He's just like, I barely remember them. Barely remember that record. It was like, but to them, it was like, oh, we're making a record with Steve Albini. It was such a big deal. So there's a lot of moments of like, I really appreciated that the band was really honest and open about, just the difficulties up with it, and really frank. There's that great part where they just made Dear You, is that the album, the one that people didn't like, and Blake says, he says, we thought when we put it out there it was going to be like a clutch of robins flung out into the world, we'd be like, here you go. And he does this gesture with him like, we've made this for you. And it's just like, no, the world did not appreciate it. But then it was just like they break up, and like 2 years later it's like people are paying hundreds of dollars to find a CD. And it's that's not an unusual story of just being underappreciated. So it's kind of sweet that the filmmakers do kind of push them into getting into a room finally. It seems like it takes forever. Like Chris goes in and plays a bit on his own, and everyone, but Blake is just like, no, I'm not interested, no. And then it kind of happens, and then it's just like cuts to them, playing, massive Pitchfork Festival audiences, and it's just kind of, again, it's rightfully they deserve it.
It's it's this, like, just the alchemy of personalities in a band, or any kind of like collaborative creative project. There does seem to be a clock on most things. Like, things, people change, evolve, but you're in that sweet spot where it's happening and it's good. And I, as someone who was a part of a large creative effort in Lodge 49 that ended too soon, we were all still in love with each other when when we got canceled. And I remember I was talking with Wyatt at one point after, and and we're just bummed and everything, but he's like, he's such a he has such a great perspective. He's like, well, you don't know what would have happened if we kept going. We all might have hated each other at the end. And I was like, that's true. Like, who knows? And so we kind of get to hold on to this. And like, I think those guys kind of like, they got to the bitter end, and it had to end.
Yeah, a fight in a van. It's classic. Like,
Yeah.
a fight in a van, and then just storming off.
Yeah.
It's like they knew how to push each other's buttons, and enough was enough.
I recently watched, I didn't know about, it's like 3 hours long. It's a very thorough documentary about the East Bay punk scene.
I've seen that. Yes.
That has like everybody's in it. And there's just like one little bit about Jawbreaker. And you could tell that everyone up there, like, when those guys came in, like, they're like, oh, this is like, these are the pros. These guys know what they're doing. And I think they were slightly older than a lot of people in that scene. And they just had, they had chops in like a real way. And in the end, like, the dynamics of the band, burnout and everything, those records are that's what it's for. It is about the record. In the end, it is the the thing you made that people are going to find. And they managed to do it. And yeah, I think, I know, I'll be listening to those records my whole life. It's great.
You mentioned something early in the interview, which I just think is so important, that listening to records still transports me. It's time travel.
Yeah.
I can remember where I was when I heard it, what it was like on the bus ride home, looking at the cover.
Yeah.
The mystery of not understanding certain things at a certain time, being like, I'm not ready for this record. And then it becomes your favorite record 3 weeks later. I think it's just a lucky thing to experience. I love it. It's one of my favorite things, is just remembering, going home with the Radio for Europe single and just putting it on, and just not being able to flip over the record because I loved Radio for Europe so much. I didn't want to hear the B-side yet. I was like, had headphones on, and it was like a Sunday afternoon, and it was like too late to catch the bus to go down and see if they had any other records. It was like all those things. That's like, yeah, that was just one record, one song. And I just remember so much.
Yeah. The subject of Lodge 49 is time and the mystery of time. And like, that's why I do think that's why music is so important to the show. Because like, just what you described, time, music is a time machine. It's the only time machine we have. And it somehow like activates some kind of circuit in us where we are transported. And yeah, and everyone has those bands that do it for them. And yeah, it's a lovely thing. And so like, Jawbreaker just like is like is a time machine band for me. They could still put out a new record. Like, why not, guys? Come on, we're waiting.
Oh, so they haven't. They didn't do that.
I don't think so. I've heard some talk. I actually checked before. I was like, have they put something else? I don't think so. Okay. So they're, we'll see what happens.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I think that's a rarity.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, if you could put one Jawbreaker song into a piece of art you make, whether it's like one of your novels or, in Lodge 49, do you have a song in mind that you would be like, oh, I could really imagine this being used well?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I think I'll cheat and do two. I think West Bay Invitational on 24-Hour Revenge Therapy it's a story of just a party. And it seemed to capture a moment in time, a very specific moment of time. There's a line in the kitchen was crowded and steamy, isn't it always? And like it's just a work of poetic magic. I love it. And it has such a big, welcoming feeling to it. Like, it just makes my heart soar when I listen to it. So that's one. And then I think Accident Prone on Dear You is just like an epic heartbreak track, and has that big sound. I could see that swell happening. Yeah, I'll go with those two. But yeah, the thing about Blake's lyrics is they're so specific in time and place, like, which I like. It's like a fiction writer. Like, I love that. But those things become universal over time, and it's that sound and feeling that comes through as well.
Amazing. Well, at the end of every interview, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on the subject matter. Yeah. So I looked up, and the Roxy holds 500 people. Okay. So on a scale from 1 being the lowest and 500 being the highest, how many people would you turn around to actually face Jawbreaker playing that show on a scale from 1 to 500 rating this movie?
Well, the people that turn their back, I'd punch, and then everyone else would, I think, just turn forward, and then all would be forgiven, and we'd all ascend into heaven. And
so, like, about maybe like 370.
Yeah, that's about right. That's
that's what I figured out. That's what I have written down. 370 seems good.
Yeah.
I mean, do you, as a fan, do you feel like the documentary did justice to their story?
It did. I thought it was a great music doc. I mean, I knew I would be enthralled no matter, but like, I actually think documentary itself has a specific thesis, and it is kind of hinges on this weird moment in time where this band of these like dudes who were just playing, and they were offered a chance to go to a new place, and the world like never forgave them for it, and so that really holds it together. It's really well made, and all the guys in the band are really interesting and smart, and have their perspective looking back has wisdom, but also in the moment when they're together, it's real and raw and awkward, and that's interesting to watch as well. So a great talk. And I didn't know those guys did the Minutemen doc too, which is also great. So yeah, they know what they're doing.
I want to convince people, if you haven't seen Lodge 49, please see it. It's one of my favorite things ever. I'm going to put links to it, as well as links to Jim's publishing house, Tiger Van Books, in the show notes. I'm so excited to see what you're going to do next. Again, that show I've watched it a lot. And it's a very helpful show, I think, for certain people, in terms of just the sense of community and a sense of heart, and just amazing story and music, and just an amazing mystery that you made. So thank you.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. This was super fun. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday. We are a completely independently produced affair, so the best way to support us is to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app, and to subscribe to our Patreon over at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get exclusive weekly bonus episodes every Sunday, as well as one-of-a-kind handmade Revolutions Per Movie goods that I send out to you. You can follow the show on social media at Revolutions Per Movie, and find more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!